Hello, hello, Metabolic Living. So excited to be here with you all today. If I haven't met you before, my name is Bella. I am the senior nutritionist and also the recipe developer here at Metabolic Living. And today I just wanted to touch on a topic that we get all the time and one that is so important when it comes to nutrition and your health. And that is how to read a nutrition label or a food label. So I'm going to be giving you guys some really simple advice today, but advice, in my opinion, that can completely transform your health, whether it be your metabolism, your hormones, your brain. All of these things can be greatly affected by how you are eating. And more often than not, you are going to be consuming foods that have some sort of label on the back. So it's really good to just be well versed in what exactly everything on the back of the packet actually means. So first things first, let's talk about ingredients. Now, the greatest and most simple principle, in my opinion, is to eat real food. And if you're in our Metabolic Mastery Club, you've heard me say that a million times, but I can't stress it enough. Truly, when you're looking at a food label, here's an example. Here's our Metabolic Super Protein. If you haven't seen a food label before, I'm sure you have, but just to run through it, it's going to be on the back of the package. It's going to have a serving size, how many servings are in the package altogether, and then all of these numbers down here, things like calorie content, fat content, protein content, all of that stuff, and then also some micronutrients and minerals as well. And then, of course, your ingredients at the bottom. So when it comes to ingredients, I really want you to make sure that there are no ingredients on that list that you don't recognize. So no, yellow 45 or any kind of neon food coloring, no weird chemical names that you have no clue what they are. I do like to tell myself, if I have no idea what an ingredient even means, then my body is probably not going to recognize it either, and it's not going to do me any good. So definitely kind of be mindful. You are looking for ingredients that you do understand. A really good example of these siete tortillas, which I absolutely love. They have some very simple ingredients. I don't know if you can see there on the back, but it's literally just almond flour, tapioca flour, water, sea salt, and xanthan gum. Very simple. I know what all of those things are, so I feel very safe putting that into my body. Also, just be very mindful of alternate and sneaky names that people can slip in there. So if you're someone who's trying to avoid sugar, be mindful that sugar has literally over 50 different names that they can pop in there, everything from high fructose corn syrup, just to regular table sugar, granulated sugar. There's so many different names that they kind of disguise and pop them in there. So try and be well versed in that. You can do a very simple kind of Google search to look for some different names of sugar that they might use. Also things like MSG, if you're trying to avoid those, they also have a ton of different names, usually under kind of a yeast extract. So be aware. I will say just some main ones that I always look for and avoid are MSG, like I mentioned. I do try and avoid mass amounts of sugar, especially sugar in kind of the form of high fructose corn syrup or something like that. Trans fats, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And then things like BHA and BHT, as well as I mentioned, general rule of thumb, things that I don't have a clue what they are, I definitely tend to avoid them. Another thing about ingredients in general, the fewer ingredients, the better. So for example, when you're looking for some almond milk, say, I always try and go for something that's just going to be almonds and water rather than, really long list of ingredients featuring things like carrageenan and different stabilizers and gums. When in doubt, keep it really simple. All right, so I did want to also touch on kind of macros and numbers, because I know you guys do have questions about those. So I do think it's really important, even if you're not someone who tracks calories or macros, just to know how much of each ingredient is in the product. Especially, again, like I mentioned, if you're someone who's conscious about certain things, so for example, sugar, it's a really good idea also just to understand the numbers, so you can, be better informed about making choices for yourself. So again, I do have some different kind of options here. I did want to use this cereal, ketogenic cereal, that my husband really enjoys as a carbohydrate example. So starting off there, here it is, in case you can see it, hopefully you guys can see it. It says total carbohydrate 14 grams, dietary fiber 9 grams. It's got 0 grams of sugar and 0 grams of added sugar. So really important when it's looking at carbs. I hate it when people completely demonize carbohydrates. One thing that's so important, I think, when you're looking at the back is differentiating between carbs and sugar on the back. Sugar is of course absorbed more rapidly in the body. It's not as healthy for you. So my biggest question always when I'm looking at the carbohydrate number is, where are my carbs coming from? So looking for things, like your quinoa and your just slower absorbed carbohydrates in the body rather than just straight sugar. And this doesn't actually have any sugar in it. I reckon the carbs are probably coming from the pea flour and the potato fiber, as well as tapioca flour. So again, things that we understand and not straight sugar. So that's a really important question to ask. Once you're looking at that number, where are those carbs coming from? And again, referring back to the ingredients list, we'll be able to tell you that. For those people who are following a lower carb diet or lifestyle, such as our Metabolic Factor program, you're of course looking for a lower number here under the carbohydrate section. I will say what you are going to be really interested in is the net carbs, and this is why this cereal is such a good example. Even though this has 14 grams of total carbohydrate, it has 9 grams of dietary fiber. So a very easy way to figure out the net carbs, and net carbs, by the way, are the carbohydrates that are actually going to be absorbed by your body. You calculate these by taking the total carbohydrate and minus the dietary fiber, and that's going to give your net carb count. So, while this is 14 grams, if you minus that 9 grams of dietary fiber, you have significantly less carbohydrates per serving. So for someone following a lower carb lifestyle, this could actually be a really great cereal for you. So that's something to kind of pay attention to also. So moving on to our next macronutrient, which is fat. I've got some good old walnuts here, which are of course a high fat food. Just like with the carbohydrates, when you're looking at the back and fat is typically at the top, you're going to be looking at what is the source of fat. Again, this has 18 grams of fat per serving, which is quite significant. But my biggest question here is, where is the fat coming from? So again, this is actually broken it down really, really nicely. We've got our saturated fat, trans fat, polyunsaturated fats, and monounsaturated fats. What I'm really interested in here are the trans fats. You really are looking to avoid trans fats and also things like hydrogenated oils, which are often listed in the ingredients. So make sure that the fat that you are consuming is from real foods. And again, here, I can see that there's actually 0 grams of trans fat. Most of the fat is polyunsaturated, which is brilliant. And the only ingredient here is organic walnuts. So I'm saying to myself, okay, Bella, it's coming from real food. There's no weird oils that they've added to the walnuts here. This is probably a good option for you. Do you want to say a little note? I absolutely love healthy fats, but I will say, if you're not on kind of a lower carb diet, please do be a little bit mindful about your fat content. Just with any macronutrient, you want to have everything in balance. But I will just say a note, even though I love healthy fats, a lot of people do tend to go a little bit overboard. And this number can be really, really helpful to kind of stop you from eating too much fat if you're also consuming a lot of carbohydrates. I do believe that carbohydrates plus fat is that secret little sauce for weight gain. So definitely something to be a little bit mindful of, unless you're on a ketogenic diet or something like that. And then my favorite macro of all, not to, favoritize, but do think protein is absolutely so crucial, especially in our programs, especially for a lot of you whose goals are weight loss and muscle building and things like that. And that is protein. And of course, I'm using our fabulous Metabolic Super Protein as my example. So protein is often right there underneath the carbohydrates. Typically goes fat, carbs, and then it looks at our protein. Honestly, my rule of thumb here is always just to look for foods that are high in protein if possible. So things like protein powder, really, really wonderful. You'll find a lot of packaged and processed foods don't actually have a lot of protein unless they're labeled as such. So definitely pay attention to that. I wouldn't personally waste my money on food that has like 1 gram of protein if it has loads of other junk in it, especially. So definitely pay attention to that. And this protein is 15 grams per serving, which is a really excellent place to start. Of course, on the nutrition label, you can also find things like sodium, Sodium and cholesterol, things like that, you'll also see up there, as well as, you know, some other micronutrients. So that Siete Foods package has vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium also. So just further kind of tidbits of information. With sodium, in my opinion, for processed and packaged foods, you don't want to go overboard. And that is specifically because the salt that they add is processed table salt, usually, rather than the mineral rich things like Himalayan sea salt, which we do, you know, actually encourage you to sprinkle on your food. So just something to be mindful of there. What else? Oh, another really important thing is serving size. Now this sounds really, you know, duh, but don't forget to look at the serving size. You know, for some foods it's a little bit more obvious, like, you know, this serving size is 1 scoop, sure, but this is interesting. This is 2 tortillas, a serving size. Things like pizzas and stuff like that, if you are going to choose a pizza, definitely look at the serving size, because often, you know, even those personalized sized pizzas, it will say serving size 1/3 of the pizza, but in your mind you might be looking at it thinking, oh, you know, that's a small pizza, it's probably all of it for me. But definitely check, because of course those macros, those calories, they're really going to add up if you're not kind of sticking to a serving size. So I think that's all I've got on food labels. If you guys have any other questions, please reach out to me. If I didn't touch on something that you asked, I'm so sorry, but please message me. I'd love to help you. I know it can be a little bit confusing, you know, especially as there's more and more of them, as I mentioned, more and more kind of health foods, I say health foods, that are packaged and processed, and can be kind of difficult to wrap our heads around, especially, you know, with all the marketing that comes with them. Again, if in doubt, I really encourage you just to stick to real foods. A lot of food you can eat doesn't even have a label, you know, things like fresh produce, things like grass-fed organic meats, even if you're doing grains, some organic soaked and sprouted grains can be wonderful, and none of those things really have a label at all. So don't feel like you have to buy these packaged and processed foods, but if you do fancy enjoying something like these almond flour tortillas or whatever, please just make sure you're reading the labels, because it really can make such a difference. So I hope this was helpful. Have a wonderful day, and again, if you have any questions, we are here to answer them, so please reach out. Bye.